Hey everybody, welcome back to the channel. 2021 is finally over. I think we can all agree that it felt like it went on for the length of 2 years, but looking back, there were some crazy things that happened. Some big games, great TV shows and movies, industry-changing news. I went through like 3 different jobs, so just a wild year all around. And so I thought that it would be fun to sit down with you guys and talk about my absolute favorite things of 2021. So let's get into it. So I want to kind of structure this as like my own Game of the Year style awards. Not that me giving out an award has any like merit or meaning ultimately, other than that it's my personal favorite thing of the year. But there were 2 things that I do really want to talk about that I don't think really fit into that structure, or at least I couldn't figure out how. And the first one of them is Power On, the Xbox documentary. It's so good, guys. If you haven't watched it, I highly suggest it. You know, it's extremely transparent. Xbox doesn't pull any of the punches making this thing. Like, they fully admit and show off every single time that they messed up. It's, if you are a like video game historian, this is a must watch for you. And even if you just have like some surface level interest in the games industry beyond just playing the games, I think that this is something that you will definitely find a lot of enjoyment out of. I know I definitely did. So highly recommend that. And the second one is actually a podcast that I started listening to this year called The Adventure Zone. It's a actual play D&D podcast, which I know that for those of you who have probably listened to those in the past, you know, there's 4,000 of them, but I promise this is probably one of the best. Specifically, the arc I'm talking about is, well, campaign I'm talking about is the first one that they call Balance. It's as far as I got, but it's a complete story by itself. And it's like 80 episodes, so it's more than enough to qualify for this list or whatever. It didn't come out this year. It's from like 2017, but I watched it this year, so I want to talk about it. I highly recommend everyone go and watch it, or listen to it rather, because it is strictly an audio format thing. And it does start a little, you know, not as good as it gets. It starts out with some, like, you know, fart and wiener humor, but it after a couple episodes, once they kind of realize what they've got going, it really takes off. It's got some amazing character work, not just from the players. I should probably mention, actually, this is a McElroy family podcast. So it's the 3 brothers, Griffin McElroy, Travis, and Justin, with their father Clint. And Griffin, the youngest son, is the DM for his 2 older brothers and his dad, which is just a really fun dynamic, and I think, you know, it helps them really play off each other. And so they have these really amazing character moments between, you know, not just the players, but also a lot of the NPCs. Shout out to my boy Angus McDonald, Boy Detective, best character 2K21. Love that kid so much. There's a couple different arcs inside it, and every single one is super different and so much fun. And I cannot recommend this enough. My personal favorite arcs are Crystal Kingdom and the 11th Hour. I don't really want to tell you why, because they would be huge spoilers, but they're so good. Please, if you even if you don't care about D&D, if you just want to listen to like a really great like radio drama style thing, this is probably the perfect modern version of that. You know, by the time I got to the end of the story, I was definitely tearing up, like, consistently. You know, I can't talk too much more about this without spoiling something, and I really don't want to do that. So just, if you have any interest in good storytelling and fun characters, or D&D, you know, whether or not you enjoy D&D or care about D&D itself, please go and listen to this podcast. So for my first award of this video, I want to give it to the best new show of the year. Obviously, I haven't watched every single new show that came out this year, so best new show that I watched this year, which is a modifier that you can probably apply to every award on this list. Regardless, the best new show of this year is Arcane. This show is absolutely drop dead gorgeous. The art of this thing blows me away on a similar level to how I felt when I watched the Spider-Verse movie, Into the Spider-Verse. It's unlike anything I have ever seen before, which is weird because it's actually done in the same art style as a lot of the like character intro videos that they do in League of Legends, the game that it's based off of. As well as I think also there's like music videos. I'm not super familiar with the world of League of Legends. I played the game like freshman year of college very briefly. But the cool thing about this show is it doesn't matter if you know anything about League of Legends. It's its own self-contained thing, and within its own self-contained bubble, it's amazing. Because not only is it visually stunning, but also the music is super good. Like every time that they cut to a music segment, you know, it was made by people who had done music videos in the past, and they absolutely knock it out of the park. Imagine Dragons is not necessarily one of my favorite bands, especially with how bad they are apparently live, as we learned from the Game Awards. But they mash up with the art style and sort of the feeling of this world very well. And beyond just like, you know, the way it looks, I think the writing of this show is absolutely excellent, specifically in terms of character dynamics, which is something that I personally need to have in a story to feel attached. And I think that there's some really great, you know, relationships between the characters of this show, between, you know, Vi and Jinx, and just like Echo and Heimerdinger, or Vi and Caitlyn. You know, there are some really great just character dynamics. They completely nail it. You know, by the end of the show, you know, these characters you will either love or hate, but there won't be anybody who you just feel indifferent about. You know, everybody is such a vibrant and important character to this story that it doesn't feel like anyone doesn't matter, which is really hard to do in writing. The only negative that I have for this show is, of course, that it's based on a Riot Games property, and I feel bad, like, you know, kind of having to hold this against the show, because it's not the people who are making the show's fault in any way. But Riot Games obviously has had a lot of problems with like treating women like crap and crunching their employees and just generally being really shitty. So I would say, if you're taking this list as a list of recommendations, which you definitely should, because I love everything on this list, just watch the show. Just watch Arcane. Don't go and play League of Legends or do any of that stuff. Don't, you know, start standing Riot Games anywhere, because they don't deserve it. But this show is absolutely stellar. Now, for my second award, I want to talk about what I believe was the best wrestling pay-per-view of the year. And I know that probably a lot of you don't really care about wrestling, but hear me out. I believe that AEW's All Out pay-per-view was so good that even if you don't care about wrestling or don't follow wrestling, that you would get just a really great time out of engaging with it. Now, obviously, there were some things in there that aren't going to mean anything to you if you haven't already enjoyed wrestling, but were a huge deal for me personally. Like, this was the pay-per-view that CM Punk re-debuted at after 7 years out of the ring. And he re-debuted against Darby Allin, who's like one of the biggest rising stars of the AEW promotion. He's genuinely one of my favorite wrestlers going right now. He's so good. And the match itself, just the quality that they had, outstanding. But then you've got other matches that I feel like almost got kind of overlooked because of how good the rest of the show was. Like Eddie Kingston versus Miro was an excellent match. You know, it really cemented both of these guys as fantastic characters and awesome performers. You know, Miro having officially fully transformed from the like weird gamer character he was doing to this, you know, God's favorite champion was really good. Eddie Kingston coming out and doing the whole redeem D's nuts, like that whole bit was so good. I realize that probably sounds really stupid to people who don't know what I'm talking about, but it was so good, trust me. Moxley versus Satoshi Kojima was maybe not like the most amazing match in the world. I personally don't really like a lot of the Japanese wrestling style. It just feels kind of stiff. But it's very meaningful because like Satoshi Kojima, he is from New Japan Pro Wrestling and Jon Moxley is from AEW, and it's really, really uncommon for wrestlers of different promotions to, get to wrestle, especially, somebody coming from Japan in the middle of a pandemic to have a match. It's really the forbidden door, so to speak, being thrown open. And at the end of the match, as if that wasn't enough, one of the biggest Japanese wrestling stars of all time, Minoru Suzuki, showed up. This is a guy who is so popular that he showed up in One Piece as himself. Like, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. And it starts, the ball rolling on, like, can we see things like my boy Sonata come over and have a match in AEW? Could we see Kazuchika Okada come over and just tear the place down because he's one of the best wrestlers in the world? Could we see Kota Ibushi come over and have a moment with Kenny Omega that from the story that they've built up over just years and years and years? Like, there's so many more possibilities that exist because this match existed, even if it wasn't necessarily, I think, like the best match of the night. But the best match of the night was probably the best match of the year, that being the Lucha Bros versus the Young Bucks. These are already two of the best tag teams in the world, and they had an absolute barn burner. And in a steel cage, there was the bit with the thumbtacks on the shoes. It just absolutely stellar. Not just in terms of the physical work, which is always great from these guys, but just the individual storytelling between. Like, there's a bit where Pentagon is like trying to save Phoenix, because they're brothers, and it's so good. I don't even know how to describe how good this is without just showing it to you, and I can't do that because that's illegal. But like, if you can find a way to watch this pay-per-view, please do it. This was the pay-per-view where Ruby Soho re-debuted after being let go from WWE at the end of the Casino Battle Royal, which she then went and won. It's where there was the Kenny Omega match versus Christian Cage as the main event, and it was a really good match, don't get me wrong, but I think the thing that everyone was talking about by the end of the night is that not just Adam Cole, Bay, another one of the best wrestlers of all time, showing up at the end to announce that he's joined AEW, but also Bryan Danielson. Like, I'm sorry for talking about wrestling for so long, because I'm sure a lot of you don't care about wrestling, but this was the kind of show where if you enjoy wrestling on any level, you will love this show from top to finish. You will be on your feet cheering by the end of certain moments. And I genuinely think that if you have never watched a wrestling pay-per-view before in your life and you watch this, it'll turn you. So maybe give it a shot. So next up is the New to Me Award. This is the best video game that didn't come out this year, but that I played for the first time this year. And it's a pretty steep competition. I kept a list throughout the entire year because I kind of knew that I was probably going to do this sort of video at the end. And I played 66 games this year, so definitely steep competition. But I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that the best game that I played this year, that didn't come out this year, is Grim Fandango. Now, I don't know how many people have actually played this game, but the ones who I know who have are constantly singing its praise, and I think that is with absolute just cause. It's this game, it creates a super fun world. It's this sort of afterlife Mexico, like Sugar Skull, like Day of the Dead style world. Think Coco, but just subtract 20 years. It has some absolutely amazing characters, from Manny Rivera, the main character, as well as Meche, the love interest, and Gladys, who's this like demon who just really wants to drive muscle cars, and he's super fun. You go to some really interesting places. I don't really want to spoil it because I am hoping that some people will take this recommendation and go and play it. I think it's still on Game Pass, so you've got all the time in the world. It's got just a really fantastic message about just, life and death. There's a bit where Manny's talking to Meche and he says, nobody knows what's going to happen at the end of the line, so you might as well enjoy the trip. And that was such a touching moment for me. Like, I just really loved it. It's an absolutely fantastic game. I love basically everything about it. It is an older sort of like point and click adventure style game, which I understand is probably not going to be super popular with a lot of people. So I would recommend, if you're going to go back and play this and you're not familiar with that style of game, to play it with a guide, because a lot of the solutions to puzzles are a little abstract, I think would be the nice way to say it, particularly in the first couple areas. But if you play this game, I don't think you'll regret it at all. It's an absolute instant classic, and it's the best new to me game this year. So next up is the biggest news story of the year, as pertaining to the world of video games, obviously. And for me, this is hands down got to be the finalizing of the Bethesda acquisition for Xbox. You know, this is a news event that completely shook up the industry. You know, it was Xbox taking one of the biggest publishers in the industry and just kind of bringing them into the Xbox fold. It's absolutely massive, to the point where I was listening to a podcast just like 2 days ago where people were still trying to like deny that the games are going to be exclusive. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised. It was the same podcast where people were talking about how like, oh, Phil Spencer was saying that Game Pass is sustainable. He didn't say profitable, so it can't possibly be making money. Like, just full denial. I listen to a lot of podcasts to try and hear every side of the story. Regardless, I've gone off topic. This is a huge deal, right? It immediately solves Xbox's biggest problem from last generation, which was the lack of games. You know, Bethesda is 8 studios, and every single one of those studios makes fantastic games, with the exception of like maybe Roadhouse, who I don't think has proved themselves yet, but theoretically will, hopefully in the near future. You know, it's a huge get. It also means that now basically all of my favorite studios that aren't already owned by other people are under one roof. You know, you put Double Fine and Bethesda and Arcane and all of these together, and it's like, I guess I'm an Xbox guy now, you know? And then, you know, I have a lot of thoughts on this. I actually made an entire video about it. I'll link it in the description down below so I don't have to go too much into detail on this one. I highly recommend that you watch that other video, because it's a big story and there's a lot to be said about it. But definitely that is the biggest news story of this year. And now it's time for what is probably the reason that you clicked on this video, my game of the year. The best game that came out in 2021 is, in my estimation, with absolutely no doubt, Psychonauts 2. This game is phenomenal. It not only does it play extremely well, extraordinarily well, with the one exception of, I think, the fact that, you know, the way that you change between the different powers that you have equipped is a little clunky. But all of the platforming, all the movement, all the combat feels great and works exactly the way that you would want it to. Every single level is beautiful and extremely different from not only each other, but from pretty much anything else that I had seen in video games this year. Each level, if you don't know, takes place inside a person's mind. You sort of jump into their perspective and see the things that are troubling them and sort of the way that they see the world. And so a lot of people see the world in some very different ways, and it lends itself to very interesting levels that you wouldn't be able to sort of cohesively fit into a game without that sort of concession, I guess, that sort of framing mechanism of jumping into people's minds. Regardless, you know, I think this game got absolutely snubbed at the Real Game Awards. I think it for sure should have won Best Art Direction, even if it didn't win Game of the Year, because that's probably more subjective. But like art direction wise, I think this should have nailed it. It's beautiful. Every area is so cool, and the writing really hits the perfect balance between like comedy and drama. Think like an MCU movie, but it leans a little bit more onto the comedy side, which I think works because it is sort of a cartoony kids art style. there's so many lovable characters in this game. I could list just every single character that shows up in this game and probably say something positive about them, because they're all so much fun. Getting to see all of the original Psychonauts sort of deal with the realities of what it means to fight as a Psychonaut, to sort of like mess with your own mind and other people's minds, at the same time that you're seeing all of these new Psychonauts come in as interns, and sort of seeing the juxtaposition between like these kids being really excited for what this is, and then these older folks kind of suffering from having done it for so long. It's a really powerful narrative framing device. It's really great. And I think beyond all that, beyond just the game being really good and being fun to play, I think its biggest accomplishment is the way that it handles and talks about mental health. You're, as I said before, you're going into people's minds and you're seeing all the things that trouble them, and seeing the ways that they, see the world and all that sort of stuff. And it would have been really easy to either just ignore the issues of mental health, or to, God forbid, like make jokes about it. But Psychonauts doesn't do that. It takes these issues and it makes it more approachable, because mental health it's a really hard thing to talk about, especially to explain to people who don't suffer from some form of mental health issue, the lucky ones. And this game not only sort of helps to explain those things to those people, but it makes it a lot more easy to talk about it, because you can sort of use it as a bridge point. You can be like, remember that thing in that game? That's what it's like. And my absolute favorite thing about this game is that when you're jumping into these people's minds, some of these people are really broken. They're really struggling, and when you're going in, you're not going in to fix them. Like, when you leave their mind, they're not magically healthy and better. You're going in to like learn something, but in the process you just kind of like listen to them, and you understand their problems, and you let them know that like you're there for them, and that you like reconnect them with the people who love them. And it doesn't fix their problems, but it makes them more bearable, to the point where the people can then go back to sort of living their lives. And I think that that's amazing, because there's no magic pill that can cure mental illness. There just isn't. There's medicine for depression, there's medicine for this and that, but it doesn't cure the problem. It just kind of covers it up. And all we can do for the people who suffer from these issues is to be there for them, and listen to their problems, and let them know that we have their backs, and that try to understand what they're going through. And I think the fact that this game does that in such a powerful way has to be rewarded. And so Psychonauts 2 is for sure my game of the year. And the last award that I want to give out this year is my Publisher of the Year, aka the Console Wars Award. And this year, I think it goes without a doubt, it's gotta be Xbox. I'm sure that you guys have seen all the videos on all the other channels about what an amazing 2021 Xbox had, and all of those people are 100% correct. When you look at what the biggest games of this year were, a huge portion of them came out of Xbox Studios. You look at Psychonauts 2, which is obviously my game of the year, but also like GeForce Game of the Year. It's extremely critically acclaimed and well received, even if it did get snubbed at the Game Awards. You've got Forza Horizon 5, which is the highest rated new game of 2021, as told by Metacritic, which I don't think is a great metric of success, but it's something, I guess, right? You've got Halo Infinite, which is the biggest game of the year, I think, without a doubt. It's all that people have been talking about for the last 2 months, maybe longer even. Even the best PlayStation game of this year, Deathloop, came from Xbox. Like, they just absolutely crushed it on a games front this year. And on top of that, they've also shown themselves to just be a really excellent company for the consumers. You know, they've been extremely transparent with things like that Power On documentary that I talked at the beginning of this video. You know, and just speaking honestly and truthfully to all of us in the community. You know, we see people like Jason Ronald and Phil Spencer and all of the like honestly really high-ranking people, even like Sarah Bond, doing the podcast circuit and showing up on different content creators' channels to talk about the issues and sort of talk about what it's like for them and what they're working on and what they're excited about, and just, you know, being people, which is really important. It turns them into, you know, a relatable group of employees instead of a faceless corporation, which I think is a problem that basically every other publisher has. You know, I also feel like this is the year that Game Pass really hit its stride. You know, this is the year where consistently really big games, like all of the ones that I just said, except Deathloop, which will show up next year, dropped into Game Pass, along with tons of really huge day and date ones. We just found out that, you know, the Mass Effect Legendary Edition is coming into Game Pass. I think it's already in, actually. You know, a lot of the biggest games of this year, in terms of engagement or review scores or whatever metric you want to look at, almost, you know, almost any metric, they show up on Game Pass. You know, it's this is the year that Game Pass went from being a service that is pretty good and you hear people talking about, to a service that is that Netflix level thing where if you don't have Game Pass at this point, you're missing out. Like, you're not gonna really be part of the conversation, and I think that's incredible for them. I'm really excited for them. You know, this is also the year that, as I talked about earlier, that they finalized their acquisition of Bethesda, which is a huge deal. They added some of the best studios in the industry to their first-party lineup, which is absolutely massive for them. Their immediate competitor also added a bunch of studios to their lineup, but it was a bunch of studios that nobody heard of, with the exception of Bluepoint and maybe Housemarque. You know, they bought a bunch of small little like support studios that no one really has any idea what they're going to do, whereas Xbox bought Bethesda, which is basically a household name for gamers, and has been for quite a while. You know, they had some really great features on their new console that made it shine above its competitors. You know, things like smart delivery, so you don't have to pay to upgrade your games to the next generation versions, or just making it easy to transfer your saves from the old one to the new one, because all your saves are on the cloud anyway, so you don't have to like download the PS4 version and download the PS5 version, then go to the PS4 version and upload your save, and then download your save to the it was a hassle, and I didn't like it. But didn't have to worry about that on my Xbox. It was just already there. You know, I just plugged it in and all of my stuff was there. You know, backwards compatibility got another huge boost to the games that were in there, which is why I was able to do things like play Grim Fandango, which is my new to me game of the year. Things like xCloud not only work really well, but also, you know, were added to Game Pass for no additional cost, you know, which is a huge deal. They very easily could have charged for that. You know, if you look back on 2021 in terms of like video game news stories, the overwhelming majority of the big news stories are about Xbox, and not just about Xbox, but are very pro Xbox, very positive towards Xbox. You know, this is a year where the kind of public perception about Xbox has really flipped. At this point, if you're a person who, you don't have to prefer Xbox, but if you're a person who is saying Xbox sucks and like doesn't have anything going for it and all this negative stuff, then you're probably a fanboy. Like, I think it's time that you might want to come to terms with that. You know, they've been absolutely crushing this year, and 2022 I think might be a different story. It's definitely going to be a lot more competitive. It looks like basically everyone has some major games coming out. Assuming that they all drop, which, you know, we're in the middle of a pandemic, so who knows, a lot of them could get delayed. But 2022 might be different, but for me, 2021 without a doubt goes to Xbox. So that's 2021 in the book. Do you guys agree with my choices? Yes, no? Let me know in the comments down below. I would love to hear what your guys' favorite things of the year were. If you like this content, please hit like on the video, or better yet, subscribe. Do all the things that you've heard to do 1,000 times on other YouTube channels. It does really help me. We actually just passed 200 subscribers here on the channel, which I am personally very happy about. But anyway, until next time, I'll see you around.